I'm Jono Buchanan. In this video, we're going to spend some time looking at what happens when you've finished a track and you want to export it. There are a number of things that we can look at here within Logic just to understand exactly how your music can go out into the wider world once you've finished a mix. The track that we're working on is, as you can see it, we've got this sort of build section here for the first 8 bars. We've then got this little drop for 2, and then the track picks up and goes on a gear at this point. We'll hear it in a moment as it plays down. But one of the most common things that people do when they start thinking about exporting, or one of the easiest pitfalls to make, is to first of all look at a track like this and think, okay, well, it finishes there at bar 19. But that's to forget potentially that there are effects involved in the playback of a track, and reverbs and delays in particular obviously provide a kind of legacy to a track in terms of the way that they form sort of sound clouds around the parts that we've actually programmed. And what we want to do is to make sure we're not clipping those or getting rid of them prematurely at the end of a track. So what we're going to do is listen through the second half and work out where this track actually stops, not looking at using our eyes, but using our ears instead. Let's have a listen. So sure enough, with the delays and with the reverb, we've actually got sound until kind of towards the end of bar 21. And of course, whilst it doesn't really matter if there's a little bit of silence at the end of this mix, it does really matter if I chop those effects off. So I'm going to be a little bit cautious. Now, the way that rendering in Logic works is as follows. The first thing I'm going to do is to set marker points around this mix, making sure I take my endpoint into consideration before then adjusting the left-hand edge back to the beginning of the project. And I can either do that manually, or I can do it up here at the top of this window. These points here are showing me the start and the end point, so I can simply double click on a point and even take this to bar 22 if I want to, which will then move that endpoint onwards. So I've now set a sort of left and right hand edge around this mix, telling Logic where I want to start and stop the mix. When I'm ready to actually print that, what I can do is come down to the master output, which is down here on the right hand side. Logic's got 2 faders, one corresponding to the currently selected track, and then the place where that sound is being fed. And at the moment I can see the stereo output. If for any reason you're not seeing that, simply open up the mixer for your project and you'll find it's down here towards the right hand side. And you'll know that it's the stereo out, it's labeled that, but also what you'll find is that it has this bounce button, which we're going to press now, because this is the area where we get to choose what sort of a file we want to make and where we want to put it. So by default, what happens within this window is that I have a chance first of all to decide what type of file I want to bounce, and Logic will actually allow you to bounce multiple formats at the same time. So if I want a full frequency file, a CD quality file as we used to call it back in the day, I'm going to select this PCM option, and over on the right hand side I can decide whether or not I want this to be a WAV file or an AIF. And what I can then do is to choose its resolution, 16-bit I'm going for, and my sample rate at my of this particular project is 44.1 kilohertz. So I can see those here. I can decide whether or not I want to split this file out as separate left and right files, which we don't really do that much anymore, or to go for the interleaved option, which produces one file which contains the left and the right, which is the more common choice. So I'm going to leave these settings as they are at the moment. Logic allows you to print in real time or as an offline bounce. Now that's really seductive and really tempting. What offline bouncing will do is to race through your track and print it as quickly as you possibly can. The only interesting thing is that after many years of teaching and working with students, what I find the only problem with offline bouncing is, how do you know if something's gone wrong? I always know when someone sends me a piece of music where they've done an offline bounce, they haven't listened to it before sending it, and when I've said, well, hang on, this doesn't sound quite right, so, oh, I don't know quite what's happened at the export stage. So if you go for offline bouncing, make sure you listen back through the rendered file that you've created. And if you think about it, if you're going to do that anyway, why not just bounce in real time? I always find that really reassuring. I'm hearing the mix as it goes down. I can hear if any problems occur. So I'm going to select real time for this particular bounce. Underneath, I've got the opportunity to decide whether or not I want to normalize this file. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about what normalizing actually means. Is this a sort of weird mastering process? Well, no. Let's just immediately answer that question and say no. What normalizing does is to render a file, and then once that file has been rendered, Very quickly, Logic will analyze the loudest moment within that track and say, okay, that's 3 decibels quieter than maximum. Let's turn the whole file up by 3 decibels. Well, that's not what mastering is. And generally speaking, it's not a good idea for your audio either. If your mix is going on to the mastering stage, what you'll actually need is a little bit of headroom within your track. You don't want to be boosting that up to 0. There's really nothing to be gained from that process. So during the mixing stage, make sure that your levels are getting to where you want them to be, but I would really recommend not normalizing your file at this stage. It's just a process you don't need. So what we can then do when we're ready to make this bounce is to decide whether or not we just want to print a high quality format, or whether or not we also want to render out an MP3 file or even an M4A file. There are a range of settings, and as we go through, if I click MP3, here I have a chance to choose the bit rate that I'm going to select. I've got 320 kbps set up here, so I've got a chance to choose all of the settings for the various formats that I want to print. And when I'm happy and I've gone through this window and I've made those choices, what I'm then in a position to do is to press OK and choose a location for where I want this mix to go. So when I press OK, up comes this render button, which allows me to name this file. So I'm going to call this mix, and then I'm ready to go, and I'm going to bounce it into the bounces folder for this particular project that I've got set up. And when I press bounce, the track will begin to render up to the point that we selected for our endpoint. Here we go. Okay, all those reverbs and delays have died, and now at this point the track will end. And when Logic gets to the end and it's finished that bounce process, it will automatically stop, and now I have those 2 mixes, the MP3 and the full frequency PCM file, residing in the bounces folder for this project, ready for me to do whatever I need to do with them. So within this video, what we've done is we've explored the bounce button within the stereo output. What we've learned is that that brings up a dialog box where I have a chance to make a whole series of choices about the type of file that I want to print, the quality of that file, and the option to print multiple file formats at the same time. We've discussed the pros and cons of real-time and offline bouncing, and also advised against normalizing the audio that you print as you go through at this stage.